Hey everyone, you know many of the Earth's weirdest things have been found deep underground? So for today's video, I'm counting down the top 15 strangest things found deep in the Earth. Number 15. A Mithraeum. So discovered underground in 1931 during a building project near Rome's Circus Maximus, the Mithraeum is a temple dedicated to the cult of the god Mithras. Mithraism was a religion separate from Rome's state pagan religion, and in its early years it competed with Christianity for followers, before eventually fizzling out. The Mithraeum, buried here, serves as a place of prayer, sacrifice, and ritual meals of bread and wine for between 30 to 40 cult followers at a time. Today, it's fully open to the public and can be seen on an appointment-only basis. Number 14. Abandoned French cars. So in 2016, a Belgian PE teacher decided to explore an abandoned quarry in central France. What he discovered deep within a shaft was a cache of 1930s-era French cars, filled with rusty Citroëns, Renaults, and Peugeots. They may have had their origins in World War II history. More specifically, locals likely hid them in the quarry to keep them out of the hands of the Germans, who would have scrapped them or taken them outright. However, after the war, many were likely unwilling or unable to retrieve them, leading to them rusting away underground. Number 13. A partial mammoth skeleton. In 2024, coal miners in North Dakota came across the discovery of a lifetime when they found a partial mammoth skeleton. Complete with a 2.1-meter-long tusk, it was found on a loading truck. Once the miners noticed it, they quickly closed off the area. This allowed paleontologists to excavate the old stream bed where the fossils were buried. In time, they unearthed more than 20 bones from the mammoth skeleton, including ribs, a shoulder blade, a tooth, and parts of the hips. Given the fact that most mammoth fossils in the state only consist of single bones and teeth, this was an incredible discovery. Number 12. A World War II bomb. While World War II may have ended nearly 80 years ago, its legacy hasn't entirely disappeared. That's because from time to time, relics from the war years will unexpectedly make an appearance. You see, in 2016, residents of the German city of Augsburg had to evacuate their homes after an undetonated World War II-era bomb was found underneath a construction site. In total, 54,000 people were forced to relocate until the German police could defuse the bomb. Unfortunately for these residents, though, this happened on Christmas Day, ruining some of the celebrations. However, the fortunate twist is that the bomb had been safely cleared by 7 p.m., allowing those residents to return home. Number 11. Church bells. In World War II, Germany needed metal to fund its war machine, and in Poland this led to a 1941 decree that bells had to be handed over to the government. To prevent this from happening, a Polish monk decided to hide the bells located in the chapel of the Hermitage of St. John Dukla. He buried them underground. One was found by the Germans either way, and one was recovered at the end of the war, and one was believed to have been lost to history. However, in 2021, further research led to the 150-kilogram bronze bell being found and dug up, and it has since been restored to its former glory. Number 10. Fran Ships. Well, San Francisco is a city that has quite a bit of history, be it the Golden Gate Bridge or Alcatraz Island. There are lots of sites that tourists come to see. So many, in fact, that the city welcomes a whopping 21 million visitors a year. Yet deep beneath the streets of the city lies something you may not expect, a cache of old-timey boats. The reason for this can be traced back to the city's history. You see, in 1848, the gold rush began in California. Deposits were located close to the town of San Francisco, and soon it ballooned from a settlement of 200 people in 1846 to a city of 36,000 in 1852. In order to get to this new boom city, thousands came in by boat, and soon the city's harbor was littered with vessels from around the world. As these miners began to settle in, the ships took on different purposes. Some served as storage, others as jails, and some were simply burned and buried due to the years of disuse. According to experts, though, there are now 40 ships that are buried beneath the streets of San Francisco. Today, busy areas such as the financial district are located above where these ships lie, and as you might imagine, whenever construction happens, it's not uncommon for a ship to be excavated. For example, in July of 2013, construction crews exhumed a 7-meter-long wooden boat in San Fran's Soma neighborhood. After further study, it was determined to be a lighter, which was a type of ship that would shuttle supplies between the harbor and larger boats out in the ocean. Another interesting example is the Candace, excavated during the creation of the city's famous Infinity Towers. This 30-meter-long vessel had quite the history. After all, it did everything from whaling in the Indian Ocean to traversing the Arctic. It was eventually brought to San Francisco, where it was partially recycled, with parts of it being put onto other ships that needed repair. Yet the reality is that no matter what their origin story, what is clear is that San Fran's buried ships are pretty cool. Number 9. The Kola Super Deep Borehole. The late 1960s and early 1970s marked some of the most incredible scientific achievements, be it the United States landing a man on the moon in 1969, or the creation of the first lunar rover and space station by the Soviets in 1970 and 71. There was a spirit of Cold War competition in the air. However, while space is the frontier that's most talked about, this competition also spread to other areas. Perhaps one of the most fascinating was the field of geology, as the Soviet Union made the crazy decision to create the deepest hole on the planet. Ground first broke in 1970, and the stated mission was to get as deep into the Earth's crust as possible. From then on out, the Soviets and later the Russians got to work digging as deep as possible. At its maximum depth, the hole reached an astounding 12.3 kilometers. However, due to both lack of funding and the fact that the hole became too hot to work in, drilling officially halted in 1995. Now, of course, the million-dollar question is, did they find anything? Well, the answer is, quite simply, yeah. At a depth of about 7 kilometers, scientists found fossils of strange single-celled microscopic plankton. And at around that depth, they also found a bunch of water. This water was boiling with an unexpectedly high amount of hydrogen gas, getting so hot that it reached a temperature of 180 degrees Celsius. They also had some of their assumptions proven wrong. For example, while the scientists expected to find layers of basalt, none were ever found, challenging the assumption that these layers did indeed exist. Now, despite getting so deep, the scientists didn't get anywhere close to the Earth's core. In order to pull that off, they would have had to drill for about 6,400 kilometers. To put this into perspective, the borehole just got 0.2% to the way there. As such, while it may have been deep, I'm sure that even more strange discoveries would have been made if they had been able to keep going. Despite this, the Russians have a lot to be proud of. After all, their creation is still the world's largest human-made borehole, and the second largest borehole in general. So, it is fair to say the Kola Super Deep Borehole is nothing short of impressive. Number 8. The Dorp Spheres. On their face, the Dorp spheres are pretty strange. Found sometime in the 1970s in a mine near the town of Ottosdal in South Africa, they were found in a set of 3-billion-year-old pyrophyllite deposits. Coming in at between 0.5 and 10 centimeters in diameter, they vary widely in shape. After all, they range from being flattened spheres to well-defined disks, and often are intergrown with other nearby disks. On one hand, these spheres, while odd, have a scientific explanation. Most geologists agree that they formed in volcanic sediments about 3 billion years ago. While they do have those weird grooves, geologists have suggested that they're natural in origin. Furthermore, similar spheres have been found all the way in Australia that are between 2.7 to 2.8 billion years old. And as such, it seems like this process is not only natural, but not also limited to the South African mine. However, these findings haven't stopped the internet conspiracy theorists from suggesting another origin story. They contend that the spheres were not put there naturally, instead they were inserted into the rock by aliens. More specifically, articles from the early 1980s speculate that the spheres were made by, quote, a higher civilization, a pre-flood civilization about which we know virtually nothing, end quote. And it may even be the remains of an old spaceship. Well, the supposed evidence for this alien placement is due to the objects being, as the report puts it, perfectly spherical in shape. These articles also claim that the spheres were made up of a nickel-steel alloy, which does not happen naturally here on Earth, and that the grooves on them were evidence of some sort of alien tampering. And as you might imagine, these explanations have not been enough for many, and on some corners of the internet, it's still possible to find reports that have contradicted the scientific evidence. The reality is that the idea that aliens put the spheres there is non-verifiable. After all, there's no way for us to verify or be sure that aliens did not do the deed. Yet, given the strong natural explanation, I say that the chances that aliens had anything to do with 3-billion-year-old rock deposits are virtually zero. Moving on to number 7, Walrus Bones. London has a pretty extensive set of rail and metro lines, and of all the city's hubs, St. Pancras often considered to be the most incredible. providing access to everything from local trains to international routes out to Belgium, France, and the Netherlands. The station is absolutely massive and incredibly impressive. It's partially because of its grand and historic status that the decision was made to upgrade it in 2003. As part of the excavations, the decision was made to dig up an old cemetery. While human remains were expected and certainly found, workers were at a loss when they discovered an oddity: the remains of a 4-meter-long Pacific walrus. Often they're found up north in the Bering Sea. This now endangered species is pretty massive, coming in at a whopping 2 tons. It was unclear exactly how and why the walrus was buried there. Unfortunately, the London Zoological Society had no record of the burial, and so archaeologists had to get crafty. After digging through the archives, they landed on the potential culprits: 2 walruses that were housed at London Zoological Gardens in the mid-19th century. The first walrus was emitted in 1853 and is currently the prime suspect. This is because the specimen was believed to have been dissected by anatomists. By chance, the St. Pancras Old Cemetery was located very close to the Zoological Gardens, and this perhaps led to the most believable story, which is that the walrus was dissected and simply buried there due to the convenient location. However, that's not the only theory out there. A second one suggests that the second walrus may be the culprit. Admitted in 1867, this specimen was caught in the Labrador Sea and was well loved by the citizens. However, its whereabouts once it passed away are not clear, and it's believed that it may have been part of a dissecting incident. During this time period, there was a surplus of doctors and a shortage of corpses to dissect. This meant that there was common for gravediggers to dig up cemeteries for remains, selling them on the black market to budding surgeons. Since the walrus bones were not found alone, but in a casket with the remains of 8 other people, it's been theorized that the walrus may have been dissected, and then the group dumped it into the cemetery for convenience. Well, this in turn would explain the lack of documentation surrounding its existence. Well, I guess we'll leave it up to you to decide. Does the first theory sound correct, or does the second one seem more likely? Let us know in the comments. Number 6. Pompei. Of all the things to be found buried underground, Pompei is easily the most famous. It's often considered to be the world's largest time capsule, and in many ways it was the Las Vegas of the ancient world. After all, Pompei was known to be a playhouse filled with everything from live entertainment to brothels, making it a place where people could go to vacation and to go wild. And while it offered good times year-round, I wouldn't have want to have been there in October of 79 AD. That's because over the course of 2 days, Mount Vesuvius erupted, ejecting molten rock, pulverized pumice, and hot ash at a rate of 1.5 million tons per second, ultimately releasing 100,000 times the thermal energy of the atomic bomb. As you might imagine, this was bad news for Pompei and the neighboring city of Herculaneum, as both were obliterated and buried underneath massive pyroclastic surges and asphalt deposits. Now, while this was tragic in a human sense, after all, a total of about 20,000 people died, what it ended up being was a massive boon for archaeologists 1,000 years later. That's because the city being completely covered in ash proved to be a great thing for preservation. In 1748, excavations under the reign of Charles of Bourbon found even more structures. Excavation has continued, and the end result has been the unearthing of a Roman city in almost perfect condition. This in turn makes it a time capsule into the lives of those ancient Romans, and as you might imagine, Pompei has taught us a lot about life during that period. Now, if you'd like to visit, be prepared for a long day of walking. At 440,000 square meters, it would take about 3 days to visit all the city's squares, temples, baths, public buildings, private villas, and shops. While excavations are ongoing, it is currently split into 9 sections, and while you certainly can't visit them all on a day trip, certain areas such as the amphitheater, bath, forum, and brothels are worth prioritizing. It's also worth noting that a trip here is not for the faint of heart. After all, many of the victims have been preserved by the ash, and their silhouettes can be seen on display at various areas of the city. Yet so long as you look at these bodies with a bit of morbid curiosity, a trip to Pompei is well worth it. Number 5. A Ferrari. When digging around in your backyard, you'd probably expect to find soil, some earthworms, and maybe the occasional rock. But in 1978, a Los Angeles resident received the shock of a lifetime when he unearthed a 1965 Ferrari Dino Berlinetta Speciale. The origins of this vehicle reside in a good old-fashioned insurance scam. The story goes that on the evening of December 7, 1974, the original owner of the vehicle, Rosendo Cruz, reported that their Ferrari had been stolen. He told the police that he believed it was the valet, who according to him had a suspicious gleam in his eye. The story more or less died there, and the insurance money was collected. Yet in February of 1978, the Ferrari came into the public eye after two boys digging around in their backyard found something metallic. Soon, authorities dug up the car and found it to be the missing Ferrari. During the investigation, it was discovered that the thieves had clumsily attempted to preserve the car by covering it with plastic, tarps, and carpets. However, because they left the windows open, the car became quite rusted and corroded. Eventually, it was determined that the former owner had buried the Ferrari as part of an insurance scam. More specifically, he conspired to commit insurance fraud with the thieves. The idea was that they'd steal the car and bury it. Then, Rosenda would submit the insurance claim, split the money, and then have it removed from the backyard so the whole thing could be sold for parts. However, for some reason or another, the thieves forgot where they buried the thing, and this in turn led to it being abandoned, only to be found 4 years later. But what's interesting about this car is that despite its time underground, it was actually sold to the public. You see, in order to compensate for the $22,500 loss suffered by the insurance company, said company was given the right to sell it. Given the flood of media coverage, the company decided to capitalize on the publicity by creating a special auction with sealed bids. Unfortunately for them, that proved to be a disaster. While it was on display, the thieves stripped the car of most everything not bolted down. In fact, they went so far that they even took the oil dipstick. Worse still, many of the bids were illegitimate, forcing the company to recall the bidders to submit legitimate bids. While this was certainly a mess, real estate businessman Brad Howard ended up purchasing the car from farmers. He then entrusted it to a Ferrari expert who got to work restoring it. Thankfully, there was relatively little rust, with only the serious damage being the windshield, which had been intentionally broken. This was likely due to the area's drought conditions. After all, from 1976 to 78, the area received very little rainfall. And while Brad has been given offers for it that were likely north of $1 million, he's confirmed that it is both not and will not be for sale. Number 4. A rainforest. While caves are known for having creatures such as bats, spiders, and even axolotls, it's rare that any sort of greenery grows down there. Yet the cave named Son Doong is a strange but very notable exception to this rule. Located in central Vietnam, for millennia it was a complete mystery to the outside world. In 1991, that all changed when a local man stumbled across it while searching for wood. He was initially wanting to venture inside, but he was discouraged after hearing the sound of rushing water and strong wind at the entrance. Not thinking much of it, he returned home and, over time, forgot about the exact location. This could have been the end of the story. But by chance, in 2008, 2 members of the British Cave Research Association were in the area and just so happened to talk to the man. With his help, they were able to rediscover the entrance, and an expedition in 2009 revealed some incredible results. Untouched by human hands, this cave turned out to be the world's largest natural cave. At a height of about 200 meters, a width of 150 meters, and a length of about 9 kilometers, this 1.6 million square meter cavern absolutely is massive. Yet what makes it incredible is that it's not only large, but it's full of natural wonders. About 500,000 years ago, parts of the ceiling collapsed, creating these skylights that allowed sunlight to get into the cave. This sunlight has allowed trees and plants to take root, creating an incredible jungle below. Thanks to millions of years of secluded evolution, it's got its own endemic plants, monkeys, flying foxes, frogs, insects, and hares that are found nowhere else in the world. Yet the real showstopper is the cave's geology. That's because it's home to a row of 70 to 90 meter stalagmites. That makes them some of the largest on the planet, and the ones at Son Doong are so immense that they've been nicknamed the Great Wall of Vietnam. But if you'd like a tour, the tickets start at about $3,000. The prices are steep, however for that price you get to go on a guided 5-night and 6-day journey through the cave with many necessities such as camping gear, boots, and food being included. And while the travel company does have a monopoly that may seem unfair, in many ways, having just one company administering tourism in the cave helps with conservation, and it ensures that a high-quality standard is met. In any case, the reviews for the tour are overwhelmingly positive, and I'd say a visit here is a must if you're traveling through that area. Number 3. Darencuyu. In 1963, a Turkish man decided to renovate his basement. After digging through his wall, he found a secret underground room. After exploring a little further, he came across an entire city, and that settlement was the lost city of Darencuyu. Located 85 meters below ground, this city was, at its peak, home to 20,000 people. Yet despite being an incredible settlement with a lot of history, not all of the specifics are well known. Ventilated by a total of more than 15,000 shafts, most are about 10 centimeters wide and reach down into the first and second levels of the city, allowing for good airflow all the way down to the 8th level. The creation of such a wonderful city was possible thanks to the area's unique geography. You see, the rocky areas of the region consist of tuff, which is a substance that's made primarily out of volcanic ash. Now, fortunately, this tuff is very easy to dig due to the fact that, rather ironically, it's not very tough. It's this softness that allowed such an extensive tunnel system to be dug out. And while this does have some downsides, after all, the softness of the stone does make cave-ins a big risk. Thankfully, Darencuyu's large support pillars have prevented the floors from experiencing any collapse. Now, the actual date of the foundation of the city is still up for debate. Some scholars argue that the oldest part of the complex could have been dug out around 2000 BCE by the Hittites. Others instead attribute the city to the Phrygians, who would have built it at around 700 BCE. And still others claim that the local Christians built the city in the 1st century CE. Yet no matter who actually founded it, what is clear is that Darencuyu was used to the fullest extent by early Christians. Christians were persecuted by Roman authorities. In order to protect themselves, they hid inside Darencuyu. Yet this didn't put them out of the woods completely. After all, by the 7th century, Islamic civilizations were also conducting raids on the Byzantine Christians. As such, the citizens here created a system. During times of peace, they remained above ground in so-called fairy chimneys, carving homes for themselves out of caves. However, during times of war, it's believed that around 20,000 people would shelter underground in Darencuyu. The floor below held living quarters, with these including bedrooms, kitchens, and even a winery. Even further below ground was everything needed to run a city, including food supply, warehouses, water wells, and burial chambers. Darencuyu saw use all the way up until the 20th century. However, when the Greeks who hid in them were expelled from the country in 1923, the subterranean city was closed up and forgotten. Thankfully, its 1963 rediscovery has once again put them at the forefront of Turkish archaeological research. Today, it is part of the UNESCO World Heritage Site of Cappadocia and now receives tons of tourists. Number 2. An underground cinema. While the Paris catacombs are known for being pretty dark, cold, and creepy, what they aren't known for is being an entertainment venue. In September of 2004, police came across an entire theater complex in the middle of its halls. For those of you who don't know, the Paris catacombs are an ossuary where human remains are kept. It's located beneath the city in a series of ancient limestone mines. It was converted into what it is in the 1780s and 90s, consisting of 280 kilometers of tunnels. However, if you know where to look, there are entrances to the closed-off areas around the city, and it's through one of these that a strange theater was born. You see, Paris has a special set of so-called sports police, and in 2004 they allegedly stumbled across the complex while on a training exercise beneath Paris. The story goes that after entering the network through a drain next to the Trocadero, the officers came across a tarpaulin that said "Building Site, no access." When they peeked behind that, they found a tunnel with a desk and a CCTV camera set to automatically record those who entered. As they advanced forward, their movement triggered a tape of dogs barking. According to the authorities, it was clearly designed to frighten people off. Yet despite this strange setup, the police continued down the tunnel. In time, it opened up into a vast 400-square-meter cave located 18 meters underground. The cave had been converted into an underground amphitheater with terraces cut into the rock and chairs. The chairs faced a full-size cinema screen which, with the help of projection equipment and tapes, could play movies. Upon further investigation, the police found a variety of films, ranging from 1950s film noir classics to more recent thrillers. Now, if that wasn't crazy enough, the smaller cave next door had been turned into an informal restaurant and bar. According to the authorities, there were bottles of whiskey and other spirits behind a bar, tables and chairs, and even a pressure cooker for making couscous. Well, according to police reports, the whole thing ran off a professionally installed electricity system, and there were at least 3 phone lines down there. So, 3 days later, the police returned with experts from the French Electricity Board to see where the power was coming from. However, when they returned, they saw that the phone and electricity lines had been cut, and a note was left lying in the middle of the floor saying, "Don't try to find us." Now, the tricky part about this whole thing is figuring out who exactly us is. Thus far, the only clues lies in the complex walls, painted with symbols ranging from Celtic crosses to Stars of David. The police believe that some sort of sect or secret society likely ran the theater. However, the reality is that nobody knows for sure. Number 1. Miss Belvedere. While the Miss Belvedere may not have been discovered, it's an example of a time machine that was found in incredibly strange shape. Its story begins in 1957. Now, during this year, the state of Oklahoma was celebrating its 50-year anniversary, and in order to celebrate, the city of Tulsa wanted to create a memorable state jubilee project that would set them apart. They settled on a time capsule, and their idea for it was pretty novel. Rather than use a safe or a box, the organizers decided to use a new desert gold and sand dune white two-tone 1957 Plymouth Belvedere Sport Coupe as the storage vehicle. The idea was that this car, if filled with items, would be a great example of what life was like in 1957, while also giving the winner a brand new car that, according to event chairman Lewis Roberts Sr., represented, quote, an advanced product of American industrial ingenuity with a kind of lasting appeal that will still be in style 50 years from now, end quote. Now, I say winner because it wasn't just a simple time capsule, but a competition. The premise was simple. The contest had locals predict the city's 2007 population, and the lucky heir of the person who came closest would win the car and a $100 savings bond. Before being buried, the car was filled with items such as a 5-gallon container of gasoline, a case of motor oil, a case of Schlitz beer, and items that were considered typical contents of a woman's purse, including a bottle of tranquilizers, an unpaid parking ticket, 14 bobby pins, a compact, cigarettes and matches, 2 combs, a tube of lipstick, a package of gum, a plastic rain hat, pocket facial tissues, and $2.73 in bills and coins. Once all this was put together, the car was lowered about 4 meters into a concrete vault, placed on a steel skid, and covered in wax in order to protect it from any moisture that might seep in. Unfortunately, that didn't manage to protect the car from the elements. When the car was uncovered 50 years later in 2007, it was found sitting in 1.5 meters of water. While no one knows exactly why this was the case, the water main bursting in 1973 and road vibrations have been theorized. What is clear is that the car was ruined. This sea of mud had not only turned the once beautiful car into a rust bucket, but also had severely damaged most of the artifacts inside. In fact, the only thing that was in good shape were the few items stored in a sealed container. Now, the winner of this car was a certain Raymond Humbertston, whose guesses of $384,743 was closest to the actual figure of $382,457. Since he had died in 1979 and his wife had died in 1988, the car and savings account, which had grown to a value of $666.85, were awarded to the Humbertston's surviving sisters and nephew. Well, in any case, upon receiving the vehicle, they shipped it off to the New Jersey facilities of Ultra One, which is a restoration firm whose specialty product is a de-rusting solution which is designed to remove rust. Due to the advanced corrosion and the damage, the shop purchased an additional 1957 Plymouth Savoy in order to replace some of the parts, and hoped that once complete it would be a promotional value again to the shop. However, after investing more than $15,000 into the vehicle, the shop put a halt on further restoration. After being rejected by the city of Tulsa and the Smithsonian Museum, it was put on permanent display at the Historic Auto Attractions Museum in Roscoe, Illinois. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you next time. Thank you to our channel members.